sponsored by Skillshare. Like I said on Michael Fisher, Mr. Mobile's channel last week, when I first reviewed the new MacBook Pro back at the end of 2016, I called it the love-hate future of laptops. Love because we finally had a new design, terrific wide-gamut displays, Touch ID, and super fast, super forward-thinking USB-C Thunderbolt 3 ports. Hate because unlike the previous version with its function row and scissor switch keyboard, the new touch bar and butterfly and dome keyboard proved to be incredibly divisive. And that's just not tenable when you want or need to use macOS and Final Cut Pro 10 and there's only one vendor to choose from. But there are rumors of a new MacBook Pro coming our way, one that, like the iPhone X, shrinks the bezels to expand the screen size, in this case up to 16 inches, and one that maybe, just maybe, ditches the butterfly and dome keyboard and full-height arrow keys for something with more click, an actual escape key, and an inverted T. Now, I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. I don't want to create any expectational debt. The rumors have been few and very far between. We could end up with a spec bump again and Membrane 2.0, or with nothing. But maybe, just maybe, the same Apple that released the iMac Pro finally updated the Mac Mini and hired a full-on pro workflows team to really pound on their bits and atoms before the public ever gets exposed to them. Maybe, just maybe, that Apple has gotten its Mac mojo back. So, because the rumors are sparse but the tension in the community is kinda high, I'm gonna do something a little different in this video. Usually I'm a big believer in not stating solutions I think I want, but rather problems I have, because there could always be better solutions that I simply never thought of. This time though, I'm gonna just lay it all out, and loud, not just from a customer wish list perspective, because we customers want it all. Bigger battery but lighter, more tech but lower price, no matter how contradictory that might be. No. I want to think about it from an actual product point of view. What could the people in charge of the MacBook Pro do to really meet the needs of the vast majority of MacBook Pro customers? Hit subscribe and force click that little bell dingus so you don't miss any upcoming videos. And then, let's break it down. I'm Rene Ritchie, and this is Vector. Now, I personally prefer the feel of the new butterfly and dome keyboard. I got used to it after about a day, and ever since, whenever I break out an older MacBook Pro, I find the older scissor switch keyboards all loosey-goosey. But this isn't about me. This is about most people, and enough people seem to truly despise the new keyboard feel that, again, for a single vendor product, it's just not tenable. Also, while some people, like me, may prefer the new keyboard, I've never, not ever heard of anyone who really hates the old one. And funny as lack of hate might sound, that's a key feature for something like a keyboard. It can't be great for some and terrible for others. It has to be at least good for everyone. Then there are the reliability issues, of course. Sure, some people will tell you they've never had a problem. That's great for them. Others that they've had constant problems, and that legit sucks for them. Apple has apologized to those experiencing issues, instituted a replacement program for models outside the 1-year AppleCare coverage period, and recently mandated in-store repairs with a 1-day turnaround. Now, you can choose to believe that this is just a dumpster fire of a product, or that it's all a lot of social media hype around a small percentage of failures. That's all up to and ultimately on you. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter. Only the perception matters, and the damage that's doing to Apple and the MacBook Pro's reputation is real either way. Apple's been through things like this before. The iPhone 4 antenna is probably the biggest example. And after a lot of noise and free bumpers, Apple managed to fix that for Verizon within 7 months, and everyone with the iPhone 4S within a year and a half. The butterfly keyboard saga has dragged on now for 3 years, 4 if you include the original 12-inch MacBook, which I do. Now, don't try this at home, please, seriously. But since I had my first key failure last year, I followed iFixit's guide and popped off a number of keys, cleaned them, popped them back on, and they've been absolutely fine afterwards, every time. Not that any anecdote should ever be mistaken for data. What I'm getting at though, is that whether or not people inside or outside of Apple love or hate the butterfly keyboard, it's radioactive at this point. It's kryptonite. A new generation, a new membrane, none of that can save it anymore. It has to die. And that means ID has to have something to replace it, even if it means changing priorities on the current Mac roadmap. You know me, I'm not one to be hyperbolic about any of this stuff, but at this point, treat it like the thermal dead end of the 2013 Mac Pro, like an existential threat. As to solutions, it sounds like we might be getting what a number of people, myself included, have asked for in the past. Something much closer akin to the Magic Keyboard, but, big but, huge but, with the return of the inverted T arrow keys. Like the previous MacBook Pro, no one seems to hate the Magic Keyboard, except that anyone who types a lot knows how important that inverted T is to, wait for it, typing a lot. Ditto an actual physical escape key. I know some pros really want all of their function keys back as well, and for the touch bar to be a build-to-order option. But if the future really will be dynamic virtual surfaces, like an iPad keyboard, but that fools your brain into thinking anything from QWERTY to Final Cut or Logic dials feels real, then we'll need to get there somehow. And who knows, if Apple can add taptics, maybe we'll get there sometime faster. But let me know how you feel about that in the comments. The juiciest bit of the 2019 MacBook Pro rumors so far is the bezel shrink and equal and opposite screen size increase to 16 inches. In other words, just like the iPhone X crammed a plus-size screen into a regular-sized body, this would cram something closer to the old 17-inch screen into the current 15-inch body. But that rumor provokes more questions than it answers. When the display goes nearly edge to rounded edge, does it also go fully 4K? Maybe finally match the points with double the pixels of the pre-Retina machines? And does it go ProMotion with an up to 120 Hz refresh rate like the iPad Pros have had going on a couple of years now? OLED is also on a lot of wish lists, but while it's a stunning display technology, it's also still an incredibly compromised one that requires a ton of mitigations and still has consistency and cost factors that's prevented Apple from moving it even into the iPad Pro. Micro LED seems like the next better future, but Mini LED is what's being rumored for the 6K Pro display Apple's had in the works for the last couple of years now. Would that also work in the MacBook Pro, at least for now? Touchscreens are high on many lists, but the simple fact remains that macOS, at least so far, isn't a touch-based operating system. Microsoft spent years and painful years in the desert making Windows finger-friendly, and it still feels like a veneer at times. Apple already has incredibly successful touch-based operating system with iOS, so it's hard to imagine they'd invest the same time and the same pain in making macOS touch-based as well, when they could simply keep investing that time and effort in the iPad. I agree that, for anyone who's grown up on iOS or Android, non-touch screens will just seem broken, and I'd love to see basic navigational gesture support on the Mac screen, so I could, even crudely, swipe and tap my way around if and when I need to. But I'm not holding my breath for any of that, because I just can't hold my breath that long. Now, an iOS-based notebook, that'd be a different story entirely, but also one for a different audience entirely. Face ID, well, that could be for everyone. Combine Apple's facial geometry sensor array's security with its convenience, and you've got a real winner, especially with autofill. It would also bring augmented reality to the Mac, not just for iMessage or FaceTime, but for the future. And massive side benefit, a regular old RGB cam that, doesn't totally suck. I'd even take a notch or a bump to support it. And yeah, I said it, go ahead and at me in the comments. Pros have always had to deal with dongles, from FireWire 400 to 800, VGA to DVI to DisplayPort, mini display and HDMI, modem to Ethernet, compact flash to microSD. What made the 2016 MacBook Pro so different though, was that by going all in on USB-C, while USB-A was still overwhelmingly the norm, it suddenly made the dongle problem mainstream. Everybody needed them, and even pros that had been dealing with them for over a decade suddenly felt underwater. Now, balancing legacy with future-proofing is hard. As long as you have old stuff, you want the old ports that go with it. As soon as you have new stuff though, you want as many of the new ports as you can possibly get. And since you can't go around swapping ports after the fact, companies have to make year-by-year decisions on what to leave behind and what to keep or embrace. Apple, though, left everything behind and went all in on USB-C. They didn't even include a single solitary USB-A to USB-C dongle in the box. Some people still really lament the loss of MagSafe as well, the magnetic charging connector with the helpful indicator light that would shine green when it was done, or pop right off if anyone or anything hit the cable, and without yanking your MacBook off at the same time. USB-C power has made it possible to plug your MacBook in from any port, on any side, which I found hugely convenient. There are some third-party adapters and patents that seem to offer the best of both worlds, a USB-C-like connector that's also MagSafe, but it's hard to tell how realistic those are, or would be at some point. A ton of legacy ports would be a real regression, None, like the current models though, even now, 3 years later, feels like far too savage a progression. A good rule of thumb could and should be most of the ports most customers will use most of the time. One or a couple USB-A ports, and maybe, and I would personally love this because video, SD card, and HDMI. I think that would effectively end dongles for almost everyone, almost all the time. But let me know your perfect mix in the comments. The 2016 MacBook Pro feels like Apple's effort to mainstream the mobile workstation. Years ago, Steve Jobs slapped an iPad down in front of the Mac team and asked them why their notebooks couldn't do what that tablet could. And ever since, Apple has been working towards making MacBooks more iPad-like. In other words, instead of catering exclusively to existing power users, trying to expand their appeal to empower a greater pool of users to become pros. In some ways, that makes sense. Apple never had a large share of the PC market, and the share they had was primarily ludicrously skewed towards notebooks. iPad, though, was owning its market. Customers who aspired to be or already identified as pros were also changing, expanding, and what they valued was more than what traditional pros had. They wanted their power and their portability and their battery life, and yeah, their aesthetics too. But with these new generation of pros, Apple didn't just add in more mainstream appeal, they took away some of the traditional appeal, and that's proven to be a problem. One compounded by Intel, which has been an absolute mess for the last few years. They're so far behind on 10 nanometer, it would be comical if it wasn't so tragic. They've also failed to ship specific 14 nanometer chips so often and for so long that it's caused significant delays in Apple's Mac roadmap. And as the crap cherry on top of the crap sundae, they fail to add support for everything from the newer lower power memory to the newer better DisplayPort standards, causing Apple to compromise on RAM levels versus power draw and come up with things like custom timing controllers. But frankly, unless and until Apple switches to its own custom Mac silicon, that's all Apple's Intel problem to manage. Last year, with the 2018 refresh, Apple added batteries so they could drop back to the older, hungrier memory and offer a 32GB configuration. But they didn't add a new thermal solution so they could better handle the additional cores and power demands Intel shipped to try to make up for their lack of process shrink. And that's exactly what some pros want. Sure, maybe only a very small percentage of the highest end, most traditional pros, but that's always been the part of the market pro machines were meant to, more than just include, but actually embrace. As John Gruber of Daring Fireball fame put so well so many years ago, it's the heaviness of the Mac that allows iOS to remain light. Conversely, the relative lightness of iOS and of other MacBooks up to and including the Air should let the MacBook Pro get heavy, like really, really heavy. I've jokingly called this philosophy the iMacBook Pro, but there really are pros who want a MacBook with 17-inch screens, Xeon processors, big honking graphics cards, ECC memory, and all the ultra high-end bells and whistles. Basically the opposite of mainstream, the chill pro equivalent of a neon gaming laptop. For most pros though, the current chips with better thermal solutions so they could hit and stay at their maximum clock speeds for as long as possible would be plenty powerful enough. NVIDIA graphics also tops a lot of lists. Apple and NVIDIA have been at loggerheads for years, ever since Apple felt NVIDIA refused to take responsibility for some bad boards and left them holding the bill, but also because both companies are big enough, successful enough, and stubborn enough that neither wants to cede control to the other. Apple wants direct access to the metal for metal. NVIDIA wants Apple to go through them. Neither will budge no matter how much Apple Pro customers want them some CUDA cores. Never say never. Just look at the iPhone going back to Qualcomm modems and Apple making the TV app for Samsung televisions. But until one or both of the companies are motivated enough to budge, I think the most we could hope for at this point is Apple and NVIDIA making up at least enough to offer built-in support for NVIDIA eGPU. That way, not only could pros who really want the biggest and best NVIDIA cards get them, but they could update them as much and as often as they want or need to as well, and without having to buy a new notebook every time. Now, Apple's making a modular Mac Pro, so maybe one day, who knows, they'll also make a modular MacBook Pro as well, one where you can keep it thin and light for those times when you're walking trade show floors or shooting out in the wilderness for days, and then strap on the equivalent of a Hulkbuster style smart battery, eGPU, and extra SSD case when you want or need full power and don't care at all about the bulk that comes with it. Sadly, I can't nutshell animate that all out for you the way Kyrgyzak does, But with Skillshare, you could do it yourself. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 20,000 classes in photography, video, business, technology, everything you need to make your life better. In Motion Graphics Part 1, Kyrgyzak covers all the basics, setting up your After Effects project, introducing their workflow, and working with expressions using a typical Kyrgyzak scene. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to all the high-quality classes on all the must-know topics, so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities, and do the work you love. To sign up, visit the link in the description, and the first 500 of you get 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for free. Act now and start learning today. Thanks Skillshare, and thanks to all of you for supporting the show. If a lot of these suggestions sound like returning to the pre-2016 MacBook Pro, like returning to the cheese grater from the trash can, just with smaller bezels and modern specs, that's probably because the pre-2016 MacBook Pro was absolutely adored by the vast majority of pros. But the future is going to move forward, so all we can really hope is that Apple is learning from the mistakes of the recent past. There's a lot of other stuff I've seen on a lot of other lists as well, like bringing back the glowing Apple logo, the one that lit up so many pictures, including the ones of Microsoft events. Apple Pencil support on the ever-increasingly giant trackpads is a popular request as well, and one that would legitimately be awesome to see. An inductive charging spot to go with it, so you could just drop your AirPods or Apple Pencil, if not realistically your iPhone, down to top them up while you work or sleep. Cellular support, which, Qualcomm tax aside, macOS doesn't yet have the power and data saving modes necessary for always-on cellular connections. At least not yet. And on, and of course on. So here's what I'd love you to do. Hit like and hit subscribe, it really helps out the channel, and then hit up the comments and let me know what you want to see in the next MacBook Pro. Thank you so much for watching, see you next video.